Hi guys, I'm going to go over the 20 questions assignment for this class. This is the second time recording this video because halfway through the previous one I realized that 20 times 2 was not 100. So I had to make some changes. So if you feel that I'm glazing over this content, it's probably because I just explained it and I'm frustrated that I have to do it again. And if you have questions, definitely email me or post them in the 20 questions forum. Alright, so 20 questions. If you watched my syllabus video, I explained that the reason I think 20 questions is important, or questions in general is important, is because when you ask questions, you are actually processing information in a higher order than just reading it and processing it without asking questions. I say that because when you read an assignment sheet, you might think, okay, I understand it, but then when you go to work on it, you might have questions, and having questions is great because it means that you're trying to work out the information and work out the material and how you can apply that material to what you're supposed to be doing. So by forcing you to ask questions, I'm forcing you to work with the material before you even really get started on your assignment, to make sure that you fully understand what it is that I'm asking you to do, because I think that the majority of the confusion that comes from English 112 is not truly understanding what it is that you need to do and how to do that. So questions can generate great discussion topics, questions can generate mini lessons, and everybody learns when people ask questions. So that's why I do this. So on to the terms. That's really what you need to know, is like, how do you get points for questions? First is talking about where you can access, maybe not access, but where you can post questions to get credit. So one of the things that you can do is you will notice that every week there is a 20 questions discussion forum, and you can post your questions in there. I will not answer your questions directly in that forum. I will answer your questions on the day that we meet synchronously in our synchronous lecture session, or our Q&A session, basically. Please know that those Q&A sessions will lead to mini lectures and impromptu conversations. I really hope that you don't skip them. However, I recognize that if it was up to me, I wouldn't record them. It's not up to me, I have to record them. And so I think by recording those sessions and students engaging in those sessions, I put some weird vibe. Like, it's weird, right? Recording my students, and I don't like the idea of doing it. Okay, so I've built this 20 questions setup and the synchronous sessions to where if you don't go to the synchronous sessions because you don't want to be recorded, then you can still do very well in the course. You can watch the recordings after the fact. You can post your questions only in the forum and never worry about having to come to the session. And you can get the material elsewhere. You miss that instant communication option, but you get the information. So I don't want you to skip them. I hope you will be there, but I also don't like that they're recorded, and so I'm just giving you the opportunity to decide how you feel about that for yourself and not be penalized for it. So now, I told you that I had fixed all the problems here, and I lied to you. I didn't fix all of them, but I'm fixing them now. Okay, so each week, like I said, there will be a forum where you can ask questions. I'll answer those in the synchronous meetings. If you don't come to the synchronous meetings and you want your question answered, you're going to have to watch the synchronous meeting after the fact, or you're not going to get your question answered. There may be instances where I decide that I need to type out what it is that I'm saying because my verbal explanation isn't coming out correctly, and I will do that in where, like, below your question in the forum, but that will be few and far between, and it will just kind of depend on what the question is and the answer that I have for you. Every single week in the discussion forum, you can ask as many questions as you want, but I will only give you up to 2 question credits, 10 points total. So if you ask 4 questions, you'll get 10 points, and that's credit for 2 questions. So if you are, like, gauge your grade based on points and not based on the actual number of questions you ask, because if you ask 20 questions in week 1, you're only going to get credit for 2 of those 20. The same is similar to our synchronous sessions. So I'm moving on to this next major bullet point right here. We will have a synchronous course meeting every week with the exception of Thanksgiving, the week of Thanksgiving. You can type your questions into a chat forum in the synchronous session, and that chat forum gets recorded, and so I can go back and look at who asked questions and make sure I give you credit. And again, you can ask as many questions as you want, but you will get up to 2 questions for credit, and that's up to 10 points. All of this will be aggregated in the gradebook. You will see a massive category for 20 questions because you have so many places where you can get credit for those questions. But it should all aggregate together to equal 100 points or however many points you get. Some people like to ask this question: can I get extra credit for asking more than 20 questions? No, you can't. I'm sorry, guys. All right, so next thing that you might want to know is what type of questions count toward my 20 questions grade. Most questions count. There are some that don't, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But questions about lecture topics, course content, questions about assignments, examples that I share, course policies, assignments you're working on. If someone asks a question and you have a follow-up question, that counts. Any question that aids toward your success in learning in the course. When you ask your questions, make sure that you formulate them like questions. I guess the example I'm thinking of is like, if someone asks, oh, how many sources do we need to have for this paper? And then I say, oh, you need to have 10 sources. And then I talk and talk and talk. And then you follow up with like, did you say 10 sources? I don't know if I'm going to count that as a question. I guess that's technically formatted as a question, but it feels like a confirmation as opposed to a question. So just kind of be mindful of how you're asking your questions, I guess. If you have a question that's more than just a confirmation, then, keep that in mind. What types of questions don't count toward this grade? Confirmations. I didn't write that down, but that's a good example. Administrative style questions, okay, including confirmations. The only exception to this is week 1. Week 1, every question counts because you're learning how to figure out this course. But after week 1, questions like, when is this due? How do I turn this in? Can I make up this assignment? Can I turn it in late? Where do I find the assignment sheet? Those types of questions are very administrative, and those aren't going to count because they're really not aiding your learning. They're just things that somehow you missed. Questions that have already been answered that week. So again, that's why confirmations exist here. If someone has already asked a question in the forum and you've replicated it in the chat, or if someone has already asked a question in the forum and you replicate it in the forum, in the chat, whatever, it's not going to count. What you want to do is just post an altered version or a follow-up question of that. If you still, so like the issue is that I'm not really worried about you not paying attention to the questions that are asked. I want you to pay attention to them, but that's a lot of content to process. The issue more so is if someone doesn't understand something and they ask a question and I answer it and then you still don't understand, ask that question in a new way so it can help you better understand. Another example of questions that aren't formatted like a question is saying, I still don't understand. That's a statement, right? Format it like a question. Can you explain that again? Can you tell me what you mean when you say XYZ, right? That's a question. So try to make sure that you're asking a question. Questions sent via email don't count unless I think that information needs to be shared with the whole class. So, if it's a question like, hey, could you take a look at my thesis statement and let me know if I'm on the right track? I'm not going to count that as a question. However, if you say, hey, can you tell me what the difference is between in-text citations in MLA and APA format? and I'm like, oh, that information is really helpful for the whole class, then I'm going to share it. I'm going to email you back right away, and then I'm going to share it with the class. So you might be asking, well, why would I, like, should I email you the question or should I post it in the forum? If you post the question in the forum, I will answer it in our synchronous session. But if you need that answer before our synchronous session, then please email it to me, and if it's emailed, I get to decide if it counts or not. And I'm going to be pretty lenient with this, and it's going to be really complicated, and eventually I might just simplify it, and I'm not really sure yet, but you ask questions. That's your job. You ask the questions, I'll figure out what's counting, how to make sure your grade is good, and as long as you have asked 20 solid questions by the end of the semester, you're good to go. Try to pace yourself. Technically, you can get all your 100 points by week 5, because in every week there's a forum, that's 10 points, and every week there's a synchronous session, which is also 10 points. So every single week you can get up to 20 points. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will or that you want to or whatever, but you can. Which means that weeks 1 through 5, you can have 100 points for this category. And since you can't get extra credit, then you're good to go. You can do that. That's fine. I'm not going to be mad about that, and I don't mind. But really, just don't stop asking questions. If you want to get all your points out in the beginning, that's fine. But don't stop asking questions just because you got your points in. The questions are what's important here, what I care about. Okay. How will you know how many questions you've asked? So there will be a grade column, and all you have to do is a little bit of basic math. If you have 25 points in the column, and you know that I grade as 5 points per question, you just do 25 divided by 5, and that's 5. That tells you you have asked 5 questions. I'm going to keep that column turned off until about week 11 of the course. In week 11, that's just over halfway there. By week 11, I assume most of you will have a pretty solid grade in the 20 questions column, but it's early enough that if someone hasn't asked enough questions, you can still, if you only had 10 points in week 11 for this grade, you still have plenty of time to ask questions in order to meet, to get 100 for this assignment. So, I, again, have things in here that I haven't changed. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything that I want to tell you about this. If you guys have questions about 20 questions, you can email them to me, or you can post them in the 20 questions forum as an example of a question you have, and then we'll talk about it in our first session. Otherwise, just let me know if you need anything.